The moment those glossy photographs touched the polished dining table, something inside me went cold. Not nervous. Not confused. Cold like my blood had stopped moving. Across from me, Vanessa slowly slid each picture forward with a calm, rehearsed smile. One by one, they revealed the same story: me, Emma Carter, sitting in restaurants, leaning slightly forward, laughing, talking, sometimes just listening. To anyone else, it looked like dates. But I knew the truth behind every single image. A heavy silence filled the room. Helen, my mother-in-law, suddenly gasped like the air had been stolen from her lungs. Her trembling fingers hovered over one of the photos. "Look at this," Vanessa said softly, but her voice was sharp underneath, like glass hidden in silk. She turned toward my husband, Mark Reynolds, who sat frozen in his chair. "While Mark has been working himself to exhaustion," she continued, "Emma has been meeting other men all over the city." Her hand rested gently on Mark's shoulder, almost too gently. Too close. Like she already belonged there. At the far end of the table sat Chloe, Mark's colleague. Or at least that's what everyone thought. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she leaned in for the final strike. "So Mark," she said softly, "you don't need to feel guilty about Chloe anymore. And you definitely don't need to leave Emma anything after the divorce." That word, divorce, landed like a hammer in my chest. But I didn't move. I didn't react. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 32 years old. And that night I realized something very important. They weren't just trying to accuse me. They were trying to erase me. Helen picked up one of the photos with shaking hands, her voice breaking in a way that felt rehearsed, almost practiced. "Emma, how could you do this? We welcomed you into this family." Mark finally looked at me, but not with curiosity, with disappointment, waiting, expecting me to break. Vanessa crossed her arms, standing like she had already won, like the story was already finished. But I didn't give them what they wanted. Not tears, not panic, not even denial. I simply leaned back in my chair, slowly, and looked at every single face around that table. And for the first time that night, I smiled, because they had no idea what those photos really meant. The room stayed silent after my smile. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels heavy. Waiting. Watching. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to understand why I wasn't breaking. "Emma," she said slowly, "are you not going to defend yourself?" Mark still hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on the photographs, as if staring long enough would force them to make sense. Helen looked torn between anger and disappointment, her lips trembling like she wanted to speak but didn't know which version of the truth to choose. I reached for the glass of water in front of me. Slowly, deliberately, took a sip, then placed it back down. "I don't need to deny anything," I said calmly. That single sentence changed the energy in the room. Vanessa frowned. "What?" I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "These photos," I said, tapping the top one with my finger. "They're real." A small shock ran through the table. Mark finally looked at me properly. But I wasn't finished. "The men in these pictures," I continued, "are not what you think they are." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thin black tablet. The screen lit up the dim room like a quiet warning. Vanessa's confidence flickered for the first time. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. I ignored her. Instead, I opened the first file. "This," I said, pointing at the man in the cafe photo, "is Daniel Hayes, one of the top divorce attorneys in the city." A pause. No one spoke. I swiped to the next image. "This is Richard Cole. Specializes in financial disputes and hidden asset cases." Another pause. Then the last photo. "And this one is Samuel Brooks. He handles high-conflict divorces involving fraud investigations." The air in the room changed. Mark's expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing certainty. Helen sat back slowly, like her chair had suddenly become unstable. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh. That's not possible." I looked directly at her now. "Oh, it's very possible," I said, "because I didn't meet them by accident." A silence stretched. Longer this time. Heavier. "I met them 3 months ago," I continued, "when I found out about Mark and Chloe." That name hit the table harder than anything else. Chloe finally looked up. Mark's jaw tightened. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You're lying. But her voice had changed. Less certain now. More fragile. I tapped the tablet again and emails appeared. Consultations, legal notes, signed agreements. All documented, I said softly. Then I looked at Mark. But that's not even the interesting part. His voice was low. What did you do? I held his gaze. And smiled again. Let's just say, your family has been very busy behind the scenes. The moment I said those words, the room shifted again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But like something underneath the floor had cracked. Mark's voice came out slower this time. What are you talking about, Emma? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed the tablet flat on the table, letting the dark screen reflect all of their faces at once. Vanessa looked uneasy now. The confidence she wore earlier was starting to slip at the edges. Helen pressed her hands together tightly, as if she was praying for this to stop becoming real. I leaned back slightly. You all assumed I was sitting quietly while everything was happening behind my back, I said. But I wasn't. Mark's eyes narrowed. Behind my back? What does that even mean? I tapped the screen once. A new set of documents appeared. Property records, company transfers, financial agreements, all neatly organized. Helen leaned forward slowly. Emma, what is this? This, I said calmly, is everything that has been moved, signed, or transferred in this family over the last 3 months. A pause. Then I added, without my knowledge. The silence that followed was different now. Thicker. Uncomfortable. Chloe finally spoke, her voice shaky. That doesn't prove anything. I turned to her. Oh, it does, I said. Because my name was removed from family-linked accounts on the exact same day Mark started his affair. Mark's head snapped up. That's not. I cut him off gently, not raising my voice. It's not a coincidence, Mark. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Even if that's true, it doesn't explain those photos. I nodded slowly. That's fair, I said. Let me explain something else. I opened another file. Audio recordings. Mark froze. Helen's breath caught. What is that? Mark asked sharply. I looked at him. And for the first time that night, my voice turned colder. Conversations, I said. About how to make sure I walk away with nothing. The room erupted instantly. No, Helen whispered. Mark would never. But her voice wasn't strong anymore. Because doubt had already entered the room. Vanessa stood up slightly, panic breaking through her calm act. You're trying to twist everything. I looked at her directly. No, I said. I'm showing you what you already agreed to. Just without me in the room. Mark's face changed. Slowly. Like pieces were finally connecting in a way he didn't want. This isn't real, he muttered. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. I stood up, collecting my tablet. And then I said the line that froze everything completely. You didn't just betray me, I said softly. You underestimated me. Silence fell again. This time no one tried to fill it. The room didn't recover after that. It couldn't. Everything had already shifted too far. Mark sat motionless now, like the weight of every hidden decision had finally collapsed on him at once. Vanessa no longer looked confident. She looked trapped in her own story. Chloe avoided everyone's eyes, staring at the table like it could save her. Helen was the first to speak, but her voice was weak. Emma, what do you want from all this? I paused. That was the real question, wasn't it? Not what I had discovered. Not what they had done. But what I was going to do with it. I placed the tablet back into my bag slowly. I don't want revenge, I said. A few faces lifted in surprise. I continued. If I wanted revenge, this would have ended very differently. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. Then what is this? I looked at him directly. This is protection, I said. For myself. Silence again. But this time it felt different. Final. I stepped closer to the table. You tried to erase me from your lives, I said quietly. From your money. From your decisions. From your future. My gaze moved from Mark to Vanessa, then to Helen. But you made one mistake, I added. Vanessa whispered. What mistake? I smiled slightly. You assumed I wouldn't prepare. That word landed harder than anything else. Prepare. Because while they were planning betrayal, I was building evidence. While they were celebrating secrets, I was documenting everything. Mark stood up slowly. So what happens now? I met his eyes. Now, I said. Now your lawyers will contact mine. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Vanessa's confidence finally broke completely. You're destroying this family. I shook my head once. No, I said calmly. You did that the moment you decided I was disposable. I turned toward the door, then stopped. Without looking back, I added one final line. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy people, I said. It just removes the lies they were standing on. And then I walked out. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Like I could finally breathe again. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A message from my lawyer. It's done. We're ready. I allowed myself a small breath of relief. Not happiness. Not anger. Just clarity. Because this wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of a version of me they never expected to exist.